Alright, so today I want to shift away from the world of gaming and transition to the world of cinema because Netflix has just launched a new movie titled I Care a Lot, and it's been making waves on social media for the past few days. For some, it's a scathing critique of capitalism. For others, it's a Yas Queen film about female ferocity and power. And for yet another group still, it's a story about raw, unbridled, sociopathic malice tied together with a neat little crime drama bow on top. Whoever you are and whatever you view the film to really be about, it's well acted. The bottom line is that this movie, starring Rosamund Pike, best known for Gone Girl, and Peter Dinklage, best known for Game of Thrones, I believe, is successfully acted to a point where even the discomfort that is inevitably felt can be respected and partially enjoyed. However, acting aside, and again, the acting is quite possibly the film's best feature entirely, there are horrifying plot holes, disgusting hypocrisies, and more so than anything else, while scrolling through the discourse surrounding this film, especially on social media, and even while watching it, I found myself becoming annoyed at the shallow, meaningless, even flat-out embarrassing angles of praise it is seemingly inspiring. Don't get me wrong, there are things in the movie that are absolutely unquestionably praiseworthy, but for the most part, they aren't the focal point. Instead, there is a torrential downpour of praise about how this strong, female, powerful businesswoman will stop at nothing to succeed, so it's inspiring and a ruthless critique of capitalism. So, without further ado, let's really get started. I Care a Lot is a film about Marla Grayson. Marla Grayson is a criminal who pretends not to be a criminal while abusing and abducting elderly people, ripping them from their family, selling their assets, and enriching herself the entire time while she destroys lives in the process. Now, the hero archetype has an inverted version. An anti-hero is a protagonist that lacks traditional attributes of heroism. For instance, an anti-hero might fail to be courageous, moral, or idealistic, which complicates the audience's relationship to them. Anti-hero archetypes are actually extremely famous and very, very common. Nightcrawler, Mad Max, Riddick, V from V for Vendetta especially, the list goes on and on. The anti-hero construct sometimes allows for a more depth-driven story because the hero does not need to be entirely predictable and might not conform to what we assume to be a picturesque example of hero behavior. Marla Grayson is an anti-hero, or rather, she is supposed to be an anti-hero. Anti-heroes, despite being morally ambiguous, sometimes even flat-out evil at other times, are still characterized by their ability to win over an audience. The difference between an antagonist and an anti-hero is that the antagonist is not necessarily supposed to form connections to the audience, and the anti-hero usually is. Some of the best antagonists or villains in modern cinema do often allow for sympathy or at least a basic understanding of their moral framework, even if one does not personally agree with it, which makes them infinitely more complex when true. But when compared to an anti-hero, the antagonist is not faced with a similar set of audience relationship hurdles. A good anti-hero makes you think about your own morals and possibly identify with some aspect of their character. If you understand why someone would be pushed to, for instance, rob a bank to pay for a family member's medical treatment, or because their home was foreclosed on and they need to support their children, you are seeing that someone would do something wrong, but you understand why they would do it. Let's make it a bit more extreme. There is a movie called Assault on Wall Street, where the anti-hero loses his wife, not of natural causes by the way, after the hedge fund screws him out of his savings. He gets laid off, he loses everything, really, and he plans out an assault on the building where the CEO of that particular fund works, killing many people along the way, ultimately enacting revenge against the man in a final head-to-head battle of resolve. This man is not a hero. However, even though these horrible acts do occur that cannot ever be rightly supported, a tiny voice in the back of the audience's mind will tell them, yeah, I kinda get it. I understand why. In some small way, I'm kinda rooting for him. That doesn't exist with Marla Grayson. If it does exist, for some people, I would say that they need to do some serious internal reflection because this movie is entirely unsuccessful in its endeavor to create an anti-hero, and through skilled acting, by the way, creates a story about someone horrible doing entirely awful things, self-deluding herself into believing that she isn't all of the things she so clearly is, while hating men for absolutely no legitimate reason, and ultimately, you just want her to die. From here on out, massive spoiler warning, okay? Fair warning, there will be spoilers. The film starts right in with a monologue and a judicial hearing. I'm a lioness, I'm powerful, you either take or you get taken, etc., etc. An age-old trope from Marla Grayson of how the strong will dominate the weak. However, Marla Grayson preys on the elderly. She preys on those with memory loss. She preys on them with the help of the government. And this is not, in fact, a story about the strong preying on the weak, because she is not strong in any capacity whatsoever. This is a story about a parasite, a weak parasite, using more powerful, actually powerful institutions, such as the government, medical, or pharmaceutical industries, to prey on the weakest among us. The hearing consists of a man desperately trying to see his mother. His life is being ruined. His mother is being held hostage. Their assets are being leached away. And Marla Grayson sadistically manages to uphold an order where this man will be unable to see his mother at all ever. After it's over, on the steps of the courtroom, I believe, we get a very critical interaction. The man is driven to rage and hurls insults at Marla, death threats and similar rhetoric until he finally spits on her. She reacts angrily, stating that she will rip his balls off, and just because he has a penis doesn't make her afraid, how it doesn't entitle him to make her afraid, blah, blah, blah. And he retreats with kind of a dejected look on his face. Remember this interaction, because it really becomes critical in the overarching theme of blatant misandrist hypocrisy later on. If that's intentional, well, that would be supremely well-crafted, but I don't believe it is. Moving forward, and I'll try to condense some of this down because if I didn't, it would be over 2 hours long, Marla preys on a long list of elderly people by working with a corrupt doctor to lie about their mental state, secure guardianship, remove their communication, critically, with the outside world, and lock them in a complicit retirement home. Enter Jennifer Peterson. Jennifer Peterson is a simple old lady. High-functioning, very rich, no relatives. Marla Grayson smells cash, and the doctor forges a note of some kind, resulting in an emergency hearing where Jennifer Peterson isn't present and is given, body, assets, and all, to Marla Grayson, who commits her to the home, auctions off all her possessions, and ruins her life. Simple, corrupt, predatory, and very effective. During this process, she finds a safety deposit box, and in that box is a sack of diamonds. Being the legal guardian here, she also has the insurance paperwork and all other paperwork for that matter, and finds out that these diamonds are not insured. And standing in her office, gloating with her girlfriend, she expresses her intention to steal the diamonds and hide them somewhere else. Now, the framing is important because she denies the word steal and says, no, relocate them for safekeeping, distancing herself from the reality that she is nothing but a criminal. The simple truth is that being insured is not the only expression of legal ownership, and at this point in time, Marla has no possible indication whatsoever that Jennifer Peterson isn't who she seems to be. This is a perfectly defined example where she is breaking the rules. That's important terminology here. Another would be the creation of fraudulent medical documents to secure care in the first place, and there's many others, but no matter. That deliberate, precise, and unavoidable truth that she commits crimes and breaks the rules is important. We'll come back to that. Surprise, surprise, it turns out Jennifer Peterson is not actually Jennifer Peterson. She is a Russian mafia boss's mother who has assumed a false identity over 40 years ago. This mafia boss, Peter Dinklage, played by Peter Dinklage, is enraged by the actions of Marla and begins to seek out a way that he can rescue his mother. That's where the film gets much more interesting, and also where we need to highlight some key moments. First is the conversation between Dean Erickson, the Mafia Don's lawyer who visits Marla in her office, and Marla Grayson herself. Dean, through a variety of negotiating tactics, heavily insinuates a variety of threats. Broken bones, loss of career, even death if Marla Grayson doesn't release Jennifer Peterson from her care. And Marla Grayson seems to kind of not care about this. Most importantly, there is a line where Dean says something to the effect of, "You are going to have that doctor of yours write another note," because he's fully familiar with her scam or her grift or her predatory actions in general, "releasing Jennifer Peterson from your care." That's Dean Erickson telling her, get the doctor to write another note, because clearly the doctor is on her payroll or otherwise coerced. Pay attention to that, because it's going to be critical later when we see just how many plot holes exist in this film. She rejects his offer of $300,000, which follows the threats, and sends him on his way, which results in a short legal battle between the two parties. Dean produces an affidavit exposing Marla's business, but the judge knows her personally and is biased, and she succeeds in manipulating the scenario to her own benefit while keeping the mother in her clutches. During this chain of events, another important conversation takes place between Marla and her girlfriend. Marla goes on a tirade about how when men can't get women to do what they want, they threaten her. About how she has been threatened 1,000 times by family members who are men and only 2 ever came to anything. And this rant conjures up the image of that initial conversation she had on those courthouse steps with the son of a woman who she was holding without visitation. Here's what all the Twitter warriors are missing, all the people praising this film, well, most of them anyways. This speech rings out like a feminist war cry. Me strong woman, men only threaten because they weak and me no do what they want me to do, so me strong. But that messaging is so pathetically twisted, it loses any semblance of meaning. If a man is arguing with a woman over trivial or inconsequential things, resorting to threats out of a belief that she will be too afraid to respond can absolutely be driven, yes, by sexism or misogyny. The idea of threatening someone to get what you want and men threatening women in that same way is very, very real, but it's not true here. Let's replay the actual chain of events here using that first man, the man on the steps of the courtroom in the initial few minutes, as an example. Marla falsified medical reports through bribery or coercion. She then committed someone who was not in need of care to a corrupt facility, later establishing precedent where she is clearly capable and okay with torturing them through meds and exercise, and diet as well, where they would be barred from accessing the outside world and family would not be permitted to see them. She then sold off the family's assets, financially ruining not only the elderly woman, but her son as well, and any other family she might have had. The son then tries to see her and is denied to a point where he lashes out. In the courtroom, attempting to go through proper legal channels, he is shut down by Marla and continues to be locked away from his family that he loves. All the while his and the lives of further potential parties, wife, kids, siblings, other relatives, etc., are being absolutely ruined. He then hurls insults and threats on the steps of the courtroom after every conceivable option for help has been entirely exhausted. And here's a hot take, because the expectation here has always been recently that everyone should always condemn that kind of language and those threats, and it's always wrong to say that to someone, especially a woman. Nope. I do not have anything to say about how he should never use that language or make such threats, because when you have incarcerated someone's loved ones for your own financial gain while ruining their lives completely, people will snap, and they will search subconsciously for any chain of existing words in the English language that might deal damage, psychological damage, anything really. And that's perfectly fine. You deserve to hear those words. Point is, the idea that when men can't get a woman to do what they want, they resort to threats is a pathetic mischaracterization of the reality behind what she actually does. She destroys families, and when someone's family is being actively destroyed, they will try anything to fix that problem, anything that they can. The gender of their assailant means less than nothing. They will level threats, use the courts if they have resources granted, or even resort to something further because ruining lives creates desperate people. Desperate people in a corner, being poked and prodded and stolen from over and over by Marla Grayson, vindictively, psychotically. Well, I hope it's becoming clear that this entire theme of strong female power in this movie is a disgusting joke predicated on what seems to be a hatred of men, while downplaying the fact that she destroys lives, causing them to try and stop her. But that's just threats because she won't do what they want, and it's just how men are. Moving on, the Russian mafia boss decides to go for an escalated tactic, sending 3 of his men into the home to rescue his mother. It's an absolute disaster. She barely makes it out of the building and can't get to his car. 2 of his men presumably die and the 3rd is captured, but this prompts Marla to have another conversation exposing just how garbage her character really is. This conversation is about the rules. She heavily insinuates that she herself plays by the rules, and specifically states, talking to Jennifer Peterson, that I don't lose. If you want to beat me, get me in a courtroom. She also states, she lied in the courtroom by the way, she also states at various different intervals that these Russians aren't playing fair, or that they brought guns into a care home. And her premise seems to be that when playing by the rules, she always wins. So they should play by the same rules that she plays by. This is where I believe the claim of scathing critique on capitalism originates, which is, honestly, mentally deficient. Marla Grayson specifically violates the rules in a myriad of ways in order to trap and control seniors. Most prominently and most immediately, she violates the legitimate framework of capitalism by stealing the diamonds when she has no indication at that time to their origin, and can only plausibly assume, for the moment, that they do belong to Jennifer Peterson. Also, there's the moral quandary of whether or not stealing something that is itself stolen is a moral problem. Really, that's a whole different can of worms, and we don't want to open that. That would be like 3 hours long. But anyways, furthermore, she is engaged in 2 separate games within a capitalist system. One is akin to slavery and involves the capture and perhaps deliberate torture of seniors while denying their family any access whatsoever. And the other is the pursuit of money. One of these pursuits is an organic part of capitalism, the quest for money, absolutely. And the other has nothing to do with it. Marla Grayson is abducting human beings and stealing their assets, which blends these 2 aspects together, unfortunately, and then whining that someone who resorts to non-capitalist, non-legal tactics to fight her non-legal kidnapping isn't playing by the rules. She isn't a strong, smart female character carving her way through capitalism. She's a whiny, deluded, petulant bitch who wants to be the only one allowed to commit crimes with impunity. Still, not done. Peter Dinklage is mostly out of options and decides, whatever, fine, let's go scorched earth. He breaks into the doctor's home, well, not he physically, but his henchmen break into the doctor's home and stages a suicide. But here's the problem. The doctor who forged a test result to get his mother committed, or at least forged a note recommending that that should happen, could have just as easily forged another note, or made another statement, to get her out. In fact, that's explicitly stated by the lawyer, Dean Erickson, the expensive mafia lawyer, in his private meeting with Marla. So the fact that this is well known and well established as a viable method of seeking resolution, but just gets ignored, is our first real plot hole. Then, Marla and her girlfriend go on the run. They find a house that's on their company's books, easily traceable, but unsold, and they stay there. However, her girlfriend goes home to get their passports, and Marla gets abducted in a parking garage. This leads to a meeting between Marla and Peter Dinklage. Marla acts like she is unafraid of death and cites how it feels like nothing, so why would I be afraid? Emphasis on feels like nothing. Peter Dinklage talks a lot about torture and then doesn't torture her at all. He shows her a photo of her mother where she seems to be unswayed and doesn't care, and then he doesn't use the girlfriend as leverage, who had just been beaten and captured by his henchmen in their home, for the record, when she was getting the passports. Ultimately saying, get rid of her and make it look organic. That's a few more plot holes right there, but now is when it really falls apart. What follows is not one, but two failed hit jobs against Marla and her girlfriend. Marla is made to drive her car with various systems in place to make it appear as if she is drunk driving. She somehow wakes up, despite being knocked unconscious, kicks out the back windshield, however many feet underwater, actively, swims to safety, pulls out a tooth, walks to a gas station, gets a cab, goes home, and makes it there before her girlfriend dies, seeing as the stove is on. And keep in mind, we are given a clearly established timeline because Peter Dinklage explicitly says, right now, men are tearing apart your office and your home, which means the girlfriend is captured and knocked out while Marla is in conversation with him in whatever quarry or mine it is. And yet after the staging, the breaking out, the walking, the cab, the getting home, all of it, she's still fine and alive. Yeah, sure. They escape. Oh, and the sedatives they used on her before the staged driving accident, right, when they first initially kidnapped her, were powerful enough to knock her out for a few hours because daylight becomes full-on nighttime. But then they knock her out for a couple of minutes with a different sedative so that she woke up before the car fully sinks. And all these henchmen, these skilled kind of hitman henchmen, they don't even stay to check if it worked. Yeah, plot hole number 3, 4, 5, 6, I've completely lost track how many. They, Marla and her girlfriend, go to their somehow undiscovered new hideout despite being officially on their company books, and the henchmen ransacked the office looking for any evidence of the diamonds, so why would they not realistically follow up on all the other whatever, and come up with a plan. Track down the license plate, which leads them to the driver, which leads them to the mafia boss. There were a bunch more plot holes there. Like, there's so many plot holes now, but it's tedious at this point to go over them all. Marla tases everyone, drugs the mafia boss, leaves him out in the middle of nowhere, and when he's discovered, he's a John Doe because he has no identification, so she becomes his legal guardian. That's where one more critical conversation happens. Peter Dinklage says, "Aren't you worried I'll still have you killed? I easily could." And she says, "I could just as easily have you killed as well at this point," which is entirely untrue. They are in a hospital, so unless she has people so far under her control that they are willing to commit traceable murder in a medical environment, he is safe there. He is also a global, powerful mafia figure. So we are to believe his men aren't able to find him, or aren't even looking, or he isn't able to get in contact somehow. Once he finally does get in contact, and he will up his security, and she is dead with no recourse because he absolutely does have contacts who will perform that kind of service, evidenced 3 times over at this point. She is not actually able to have him killed. Also, she's his guardian, so it would trace directly back to her anything that did happen if she didn't do it precisely and expertly. She could make his life worse, perhaps, temporarily, but she does not have even close to the amount of power at that moment in time that is projected. And he should know this. Factually speaking, he does know this. There was one point where she did, and that was when he was unconscious in the car with her as they put him in the middle of nowhere, and no one knew where he was. But that was a finite period of time, and it has since passed. She stole his mother, his diamonds, and humiliated him, now pretending she has power over his literal state of life and death. With one phone call, he could rally his troops, by the way, which is untrue. The power over life and death is completely untrue. And he decides, okay, let's make a huge company together. Then we get a montage about how powerful and fierce she is and never compromise, etc., which leads to the perfect ending. And yes, I said perfect, because for a movie with so many brutal flaws all along the way, it really is the perfect ending. Marla is walking down the street, and the same man from the beginning of the movie walks up, tells her that his mother passed away, alone in the facility without him because of her, and then Marla dies, exactly how she deserves, at the hands of a man whose life she ruined, who she demeaned, whose threats she played off as meaningless because that's just what men do, and whose family she fully destroyed. Marla Grayson gets the precise thing that she wholeheartedly, absolutely, undeniably deserves. And one final quote about how she is just getting started plays out in the background, insinuating that perhaps her legacy will live on. Her girlfriend and her new partner might continue the business, cut one head off the Hydra and two more spawn, etc., etc. Whatever it is, the end. That's the story. The story of an anti-hero that's just a hate-driven sociopath who wants to use money as a weapon and hurt as many people as possible, getting her day in the sunlight, which she should not have done, and then dying. It's filled with plot holes. It's filled with hypocrisy-driven monologues designed to make her seem fierce and powerful, which instead showcase how much of a disjointed monstrosity the plot really is. And it's held together by brilliant acting. I can't overstate that. It's absolutely brilliant acting. She's a quality actress from a woman who makes it very easy to hate this character for her double standards, snide and vindictive expressions, and so many more reasons. It would honestly be an hour-long video to highlight all the character flaws in Marla Grayson. But one last thing, I would like to propose a theory, and that theory is that Marla actually died in the car. She drowned, and everything that happened after is a power fantasy seen by her dying mind. This is pure speculation, but it's driven by one particular scene. As she struggles free from the car and swims upward, it doesn't actually appear to be upward movement. That could be deliberate camera work for intentional suspense and real deliberate purposes, but it also could indicate that she is actually drowning. She also appears to be possibly breathing in water at that point as well, which again could just be a deliberate trick from the director to make you believe that it might be over till it isn't. But if this theory is true, it would explain so much about the following scenes. If Marla is simply playing out her fantasy as the neurons fire one last time in her mind, it would perfectly explain how she is able to make it home before her girlfriend succumbs to the gas, which is entirely unrealistic, owing to the fact that we have an established timeline. It would explain how her half-cocked, idiotically impulsive plan of just going to a license plate address, which suddenly turns into, oh, it's his driver, but she had all the components for this precisely executed plan ready to go, with her already in the car, a plan that involved entrance into a secure building and incapacitating two guards. She had no possible way of knowing that there would be a second guard with the sedatives, while she could not possibly have known what address she was actually visiting initially, just from that license plate on her hand, evidenced by her exclamation of, "It's the driver," to her partner. And it would explain how, upon capturing and leaving this man to be found, she gets guardianship, and he offers her everything that she ever wanted all at once in one conversation. The only wrinkle is that ending scene, but honestly, maybe it's her conscience. She's an evil person. I don't say that lightly. She is not an anti-hero. She is an evil person. And it's entirely plausible that her conscience does exist somewhere deep down. By the way, everybody's obviously rooting for Peter Dinklage because at least he's trying to save his mother. She's just trying to hurt people. This is the most unsuccessful anti-hero I've honestly ever seen in my life. But that conscience, that fear as well, because it could be fear, manifested by this man from the beginning of the movie, the man who she says only threatens because men can't get strong women to do what they want, while she ruined his entire life and the life of his mother. That really could be fear, and that's the explanation for why that scene occurred. It's possible in my eyes that the absurdity of this film's second half, because the second half is far more absurd than the first half, is explained away because it's just a delusional psycho woman's fantasy that plays out in her mind as the lights go out. And that, to me, might actually be a lot more satisfying given the context of who she was and what she did in this film. Overall, I Care a Lot is a brilliantly acted piece of garbage. A thrilling concept, but is too successful at making you hate its protagonist, and fails in every possible regard to construct a strong female anti-hero, because Marla Grayson is a giant hurricane of misandry, hypocrisy, sociopathic tendencies, and greed, none of which is appealing, none of which actually fulfills the criteria of an anti-hero, and all of which is hateable. Would I recommend the movie? Honestly, The acting is so good that maybe I would, because art does not need to make one feel positive emotions in order to be successful or appreciated. If you look at this film from an artistic perspective, it is highly successful. If you look at it from an entertainment perspective, not as much, because entertainment for most does not involve feeling annoyed for the vast majority of the film at the idiocy and arrogance of a psychotic bitch who is elevated by the current atmosphere as a ferocious testament to female strength in the oppressive world of corrupt capitalism. Everything about that statement is garbage, and seeing so much of it in response to this film, gosh, it's disheartening, and I want to do my own review. But that's it. If you want support, please consider signing up on Odyssey, linked down below in the description. It's a YouTube platform alternative that greatly rewards its content creators, and I'll be experimenting with timed exclusivity in the weeks to come on that platform. As an example, I might put a video or two up 6 or 12 hours early on that site to create incentive for people to maybe check out alt tech, because YouTube having competition right now is incredibly important, while not actually fragmenting the audience too much and barring people who don't want to switch from watching at all. That's not my goal. There's also locals. You can subscribe for $5 a month. I post ad-free versions and audio podcast forms there. There's merch, another YouTuber to check out, social media links, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.